For most of our lives, the story of nuclear power has really been a story about two superpowers, right? The US and Russia. Well, that story has just been completely torn up and rewritten. Today, we're going to talk about how China is rapidly and pretty quietly transforming the entire global balance of power. It all really starts out here, deep in the deserts of Western China. Recent satellite photos have shown something that is frankly astonishing. They're building more than 350 new silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles. To put that in perspective, that's more ICBM silos than Russia even operates.
And it's not just about the silos. The U.S. Pentagon is now projecting that by 2035, China's nuclear arsenal is going to swell to 1,500 warheads. That is a five-fold increase from where they are today, and it puts them right on par with the United States and Russia.
So here's the big question, right? For over 40 years, China was seemingly content with a really small arsenal. So what happened? What could possibly trigger such a dramatic and frankly expensive reversal? To really understand this shift, we have to go back to the very beginning.
So let's rewind to the 1950s. China's nuclear ambition, you see, wasn't born out of a desire for world domination or anything like that. It came from a deep, profound sense of vulnerability. This was a bomb born entirely of fear.
And this quote from Mao Zedong just perfectly captures that mindset. During the Taiwan Strait crises, China's leaders felt like they were under this constant threat of nuclear blackmail from the United States. Mao's logic was simple, almost brutally so. If you don't want to be bullied by a nuclear power, you'd better become one yourself.
In the beginning, they actually had some help. The Soviet Union provided a lot of critical assistance. But then, in June of 1959, the relationship went sour, and Moscow just pulled everyone out, taking all their blueprints with them. In what was this incredible act of defiance, China renamed its solo mission, Project 596, literally naming it for the month and year of the Soviet betrayal.
Now here's where the story gets a twist of incredible irony. The architect, the mastermind behind China's entire missile program, was a scientist named Qian Xuesen. And he was educated at MIT and Caltech. But during the Red Scare, he was accused of being a communist. So the U.S. government deported him in 1955, effectively gift-wrapping one of the world's most brilliant rocket scientists and handing him directly to a strategic rival.
Fueled by this potent mix of fear and sheer defiance, their progress was just stunning. After testing their first atomic bomb in 1964, it took them only 32 months, less than 3 years, to detonate a full-scale hydrogen bomb. I mean, that pace just blew past every other nuclear power. It took the US 86 months, the Soviets took 75.
But then, right after that incredible sprint, something really surprising happened. China just pumped the brakes. They entered this long period of what you might call strategic patience. It became known as the Era of Minimal Deterrence.
The logic here was pretty straightforward. Instead of getting into a ruinously expensive arms race with the superpowers, China decided to just maintain enough nuclear weapons to survive a surprise attack and be able to hit back hard enough to inflict, quote, unacceptable damage. The main goal wasn't nuclear parity, it was growing their economy.
And you know what? This wasn't just talk. They backed it up with action. By the late 1980s, it's widely believed that China just stopped making the special materials you need for bombs. This put a real physical cap on the size of its arsenal. It was a concrete commitment to that minimal posture, and it lasted for over 30 years. And that brings us to today, because that era of minimal deterrence is now definitively over. We are smack in the middle of what you could call the Great Expansion, and it's all driven by a complete and total overhaul in China's strategic thinking.
Their new doctrine is called assured retaliation, and it comes from a new fear. Chinese strategists started to worry that new American technology, things like precision strike weapons and advanced missile defense, could potentially wipe out their small force in one go. Minimal just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They decided they needed a force so large, so modern, and so redundant that their retaliation wasn't just possible, it was absolutely assured.
And the difference between these two ideas is just profound. Minimal deterrence was about having a credible threat of a counterpunch. Assured retaliation, though, that's about guaranteeing an overwhelming, devastating response no matter what happens first. It's a huge shift from a defensive crouch to a much more assertive, strategic posture.
So how are they pulling this off? Well, on land, you've got those 350-plus new silos, plus road-mobile missiles that are constantly moving to hide from satellites. At sea, they have a whole new fleet of submarines with longer-range missiles, which means they can target the entire U.S. from the safety of their own coastal waters. And in the air, a brand new stealth bomber is on the horizon. That, my friends, is a true nuclear triad. Okay, to really wrap our heads around what's happening now, we have to appreciate the sheer scale of this change. This isn't just a simple modernization. It's a quantitative leap unlike anything we have seen from a nuclear power in decades.
Let's just look at the raw numbers here because they tell a story. According to top independent monitors, we're talking the Federation of American Scientists, SIPRI, China doubled its stockpile in just the last decade. But look at the projections from the Pentagon. They think it's going to double again by 2030 and then grow another 50% by 2035.
When you see it visually like this, the story becomes even more stark. What was a gentle slope for decades has suddenly turned into a cliff face, pointing straight up. And remember, while the US and Russia are actually bound by treaties to reduce their arsenals, China is the only major nuclear power undertaking this kind of massive expansion.
All this construction is also changing how they plan to use these weapons. When you build hundreds of silos that are ready to fire at a moment's notice, it strongly suggests you're moving toward what's called a launch-on-warning posture. Now, this makes your forces more ready, for sure, but it also dramatically increases the risk of a catastrophic mistake, and it creates some real tension with their long-standing public pledge of no first use.
So, the big question is, what does all this mean for us, for the rest of the world? Well, the implications are absolutely profound. We are walking into an entirely new nuclear order.
Let's just be really clear about this. The world that was defined by a two-player nuclear game between Washington and Moscow, that world is gone. It's over. All the arms control treaties, all the strategic calculations of the Cold War, they were designed for a bipolar world, and they are rapidly becoming obsolete.
And this brings us right to the core challenge that we all face now. For the first time in human history, we have 3 nuclear superpowers, all on a relatively even footing. So what happens when global stability doesn't depend on 2 players, but on the incredibly complex and unpredictable dance between 3? That, right there, is the single most important strategic question of our time.